Today, we are going to explore one of the most terrifying scenarios in everyday life, with 7 horror stories involving people who shared a home with psychopaths. Get ready to hear chilling stories about seemingly normal roommates who hid dark secrets, strange behaviors that evolved into something sinister, and situations of real danger within their own home. So sit back, check who's home with you right now, and let's get this hair-raising journey started. Oh, and before your housemate shows up, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and leave your like. This really helps the channel, and make sure you don't miss any scary content like this. Let's go? The new roommate, autumn in Edinburgh, has arrived with constant rain and increasingly long nights. For Ellie Mackenzie, a second-year psychology student at the University of Edinburgh, the semester began with a housing crisis when her flatmate unexpectedly dropped out of the course. Rent, already high in the historic Newington neighbourhood, became impossible to afford alone. That's when the ad on the university board caught his attention. Postgraduate student looking to share 2-bedroom apartment close to campus. Quiet. Environment for studies. Thomas Reed seemed like the ideal flatmate when they met for coffee. At 25 years old, he was studying for a master's degree in criminal history, was organized, spoke softly, and guaranteed to respect Ellie's privacy. His appearance was ordinary. Medium height, well-cut brown hair, discreetly framed glasses, nothing that attracted particular attention. "I spend most of my time in the library," he explained. "My research requires a lot of dedication." In the first weeks of their acquaintance, Thomas proved to be exactly as he promised: silent, respectful, and almost invisible. He paid his rent on time, kept the common areas spotless, and rarely received visitors. Ellie felt lucky to have found someone so compatible. The first sign that something was wrong came when Ellie needed to get a book from Thomas's room while he was away. He had given permission via message, specifying exactly where the book would be. Upon entering the meticulously organized room, Ellie noticed a folder on the desk. Inside are newspaper clippings and online newsprints, all about violent crimes against young women in the Lothian region over the past 2 years. "It's for his research," she explained to herself, although discomfort persisted. The following week, Ellie woke up at 3:40 a.m. to the sound of her apartment door closing. From his bedroom window, he saw Thomas crossing the street in the light rain, wearing a dark hooded coat. The next morning, he found the same coat hanging in the bathroom, still damp, with dark stains on the sleeves that appeared to have been recently washed. "Insomnia," Thomas explained when asked casually about his nighttime outings. "Sometimes I walk to clear my mind. It helps with research." Thomas's behavior subtly changed when Ellie started receiving visits from her friends from the course. Normally reserved, he suddenly became sociable, offering tea and showing particular interest in personal details: where they lived, their routines, whether they had boyfriends. After the visits, Ellie caught him several times checking out her friends' social media profiles. It was Sophie, her best friend, who expressed her discomfort after her 3rd date with Thomas. "There's something strange about him, Ellie. The way he watches, like he's cataloguing information." 2 weeks later, Ellie found something disturbing while cleaning out the refrigerator. A clear plastic box containing strands of different colored hair, carefully labeled with initials. One of them, SM, seemed to correspond to Sophie Morrison. That night, unable to sleep, Ellie waited until she heard Thomas go for his usual walk. Gathering his courage, he entered his room again. Under the bed, he found a shoebox containing photographs of women, some clearly taken without the subject's knowledge. With growing horror, she recognized Sophie, herself, and other friends who had visited the apartment. On the wall behind the desk, hidden by a map of Edinburgh, was a makeshift board with photos, clippings, and detailed notes connected by red lines. In the center, a clipping about the disappearance of a psychology student at the University of Glasgow 6 months earlier. Trembling, Ellie photographed everything with her cell phone before returning to her own room. He sent the images to Sophie, with the message, "I need to get out of here. Thomas is not who we think he is." The next morning, Thomas was unusually communicative over coffee. "I'm making great progress in my research," he commented, watching her with unsettling intensity. "I'm about to start the practical phase." "What kind of research is it exactly?" Ellie asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Behavioral patterns in extreme stress situations," he replied, smiling slightly. "Specifically, how ordinary people react when faced with the unexpected." That afternoon, Ellie looked up the criminal history department, only to discover that there was no Thomas Reed enrolled in the master's program. The previous address he had provided on the lease did not exist. Terrified, Ellie contacted the police. Detective Callum Murray listened to her account with growing concern, especially when she mentioned Thomas's interest in unsolved crimes in the region. "Do not return to the apartment," the detective instructed. "Go to your friend's house. We'll send someone right away." When the police arrived at the apartment, Thomas had already disappeared, taking with him all his belongings, except the box of locks of hair deliberately left on Ellie's bed along with a note. "You would have been perfect for completing my research." Maybe Sophie would do. The subsequent investigation revealed a disturbing truth. Thomas Reed was actually Malcolm Sinclair, a former psychology student expelled 3 years earlier for unethical conduct in experiments on colleagues. There was circumstantial evidence connecting him to 2 previous disappearances, but nothing conclusive for a formal charge. Sophie was placed under police protection, and Ellie moved in with family. 2 weeks later, a student at another university reported that she had recently agreed to share an apartment with a quiet, polite master's student named Andrew Campbell, whose description matched Malcolm exactly. When authorities arrived, the apartment was empty again. The perfect tenant, the divorce left David Mercer with a house too big for one person and bills that his college teaching salary could barely cover. At 42, he was facing not only emotional emptiness after 15 years of marriage, but also the financial reality of maintaining property in Brunswick, a middle-class neighborhood in Melbourne. The solution came through an online ad, renting the guest room that Sarah, his ex-wife, used as an office. After interviewing 5 candidates, David chose Claire Wilson, a 35-year-old librarian who presented herself as organized, discreet, and impeccably referenced. "I work long hours and rarely have visitors," Claire explained during the interview, her brown eyes maintaining constant eye contact. "You'll barely notice my presence." Claire moved in on a rainy Thursday, bringing just 2 medium-sized suitcases, surprisingly little for someone who was, she said, starting over after a long relationship. David showed him the house, explained the basic rules of coexistence, and handed over the keys. In the first few weeks, Claire proved to be the ideal tenant, quiet, clean, and respectful of common spaces. He paid his rent punctually, always in cash. Occasionally, David found small gestures of consideration: coffee made in the morning, a home-cooked meal in the refrigerator with a note, "I made too much, help yourself if you want." It was in the 2nd month that David began to notice small changes. Claire gradually adjusted her schedule to coincide with his, leaving for work a few minutes after him, returning at approximately the same time. Coincidence, he thought initially. Our jobs should have similar hours. One Saturday, upon returning from his morning run, David found Claire wearing the same brand of sneakers he had purchased the week before. "You mentioned they were comfortable," she explained with a smile. "I decided to try it." Little details kept piling up. Claire started making the same coffee as him, Strong, unsweetened, with a touch of cinnamon, he started going to his favorite cafe in the neighborhood. He adopted his characteristic verbal expressions. When David casually mentioned his favorite author during a rare shared dinner, Claire showed up the next day, reading the same book, able to discuss the work as if she were a long-time reader. "It's just someone trying to be nice," David told himself. Even as the feeling of discomfort grew, the situation escalated when David found Claire using his personal computer one day after he returned early from university. She quickly closed the screen, explaining that her laptop had broken and she needed to check an urgent email. That night, checking his browsing history, David discovered that Claire had accessed his email, social media, and bank accounts. Confronted, she apologized profusely, claiming that the browser had automatically opened to the pages he frequented. Worried, David began locking his room and changing all the passwords. He also noticed that personal objects were subtly out of place. Family, photos repositioned, documents rearranged, clothes worn and returned to the closet. The last straw came when a university colleague mentioned that she had received strange messages from David on social media, messages that he had never sent, but which used his characteristic writing style. Deciding to investigate, David faked a weekend trip, but secretly returned after a few hours. What he found in his room chilled him. Claire, wearing one of his shirts, sitting in his chair, using his perfume, practicing his signature on dozens of sheets of paper. Even more disturbing was what he discovered in her room when he worked up. The courage to check on it while he was away. A wall covered with photos of him, taken without her knowledge, sleeping, working, running in the park. A diary meticulously detailed his habits, preferences, and mannerisms. In a drawer, forged, documents with her name, but with her photo subtly manipulated to appear more masculine. Terrified, David contacted the police. The investigation revealed that Claire Wilson did not exist. Her real name was Rebecca Lawson, a former psychiatric patient with a history of identity disorder and obsessive behavior. He had done the same to 3 people previously, in Sydney and Brisbane. The pattern was always the same. I identified lonely people, usually going through recent breakups, rented a room in their house, and gradually took on aspects of their identities. In 2 previous cases, the original owners had disappeared after a few months, while Rebecca continued living in their homes, using their names and identities for weeks before being discovered. When the police arrived to arrest her, Rebecca had disappeared, taking with her David's passport, duplicate credit cards, and enough documents to begin impersonating him in another city. 3 weeks later, a newly arrived university professor in Adelaide named David Mercer rented an apartment and began looking for work, boasting impressive credentials and references that appeared impeccable upon cursory examination. The real David, now living, in constant fear of identity theft, installed cameras in his home and changed locks, passwords, and routines. Authorities issued warnings, but Rebecca, now living as David, had become an expert at disappearing and reappearing as someone else. The case has been documented by Australian police as an example of a particularly disturbing type of identity: theft. Not just financial or digital, but a complete takeover of another person's life, their habits, mannerisms, preferences, and eventually, their social existence. Apartment 302 Autumn arrived in Vienna when Lena Hoffman finally found a solution to her financial problems. At 28, working as a freelance translator, the rising costs of the imperial city had consumed her savings. The listing seemed perfect. Single room in a spacious apartment in the historic Neubau district for significantly below market value. Apartment 302 was even more impressive in person. High ceilings, large windows, and elegant furniture. The owner, Victor Kraus, a man in his 40s, explained that he worked as a data analyst for an international company, often on business trips. "I just need someone trustworthy to fill the space," Victor explained, his impeccable German contrasting with Lena's foreign accent. "I'm gone at least 2 weeks a month." There was only one condition: the second bedroom of the apartment, which Victor used as an office, would always remain locked. "Confidential company materials," he justified with a polite smile. "Corporate. Politics," Lena accepted without hesitation. The arrangement seemed to be a win-win for both of them. She would save significant money, and Victor would have someone looking after the apartment during his absences. The first few weeks passed without incident. Victor was a discreet roommate, clean, quiet, and respectful. When he was at home, he spent most of his time in his locked office. During his travels, he communicated only through brief messages, asking if everything was okay with the apartment. It was during Victor's third trip that Lena began to notice disturbing details. First, the night noises. Even when supposedly traveling, I would occasionally hear sounds coming from the locked office in the early hours of the morning. The soft click of computer keys, the scrape of a chair. "It must be the apartment next door," he rationalized, although he knew the sound was definitely coming from the office. Then little signs that someone had gone through his things. A book repositioned on the bedside table, his laptop slightly moved. Files on the computer that had been accessed while he was away. Curiosity and growing discomfort led Lena to investigate more about Victor. Surprisingly, she couldn't find any of his online presence. No social media, no professional mentions, no photos. For someone who worked in technology, the digital absence was suspicious, to say the least. The decisive incident occurred when Victor announced a 3-day trip to Zurich. On the second night, Lena woke up to the unmistakable sound of the apartment door gently opening and closing. Pretending to sleep, he half opened his eyes enough to see Victor walking silently down the hallway, entering the office and locking the door. Just 2 hours after he'd sent a "good night from Switzerland" text. The next morning, Victor was gone again, leaving the apartment before Lena woke up. The distrust was now unbearable. Using skills he never imagined he possessed, he obtained a copy of the office key from the building's caretaker, claiming to have lost his own. With shaking hands, he unlocked the door during Victor's supposed absence. What he found transformed his discomfort into pure terror. The office was actually an elaborate surveillance center. 3 monitors displayed live feeds from hidden cameras in the building's hallway, in the elevator, and horrifyingly in his own bedroom and bathroom. An entire wall was covered in a detailed map of the building with precise markings for each apartment. On a meticulously organized shelf, he found folders labeled with the numbers of all the apartments in the building. Inside the folder 302B, his room, there were photos of him sleeping, changing his clothes, working. Detailed notes documented his routine, frequent contacts, illegally obtained medical history, and, most disturbingly, an analysis of exploitable vulnerabilities. The other folders revealed that he was not the only victim. Each resident of the building had been catalogued, studied, and evaluated. Some folders were marked "done" in red, with specific dates. Checking the names, Lena recognized at least 2 that corresponded to people who had moved abruptly in the last few months. On the unlocked computer, he found a document titled "Acquisition Protocol." It was a detailed manual, written by Victor himself, on how to identify ideal targets, gain their trust, study their patterns, and eventually remove them without leaving evidence. The document mentioned 5 successful removals in the last 2 years. Lena photographed everything with her cell phone, shaking so much that several images came out blurry. When he heard the sound of the apartment door opening, Victor returning unexpectedly, he escaped down the service corridor, leaving almost all of his belongings behind. At the nearest police station, his story was initially met with skepticism. It was only when he showed the photos and mentioned the names of the folders marked "completed" that officers began to connect the dots with unsolved disappearances in the area. When police finally obtained a warrant and raided apartment 302, Victor was gone, taking the surveillance equipment and files with him. All that remained were the hidden cameras, now inactive, and marks on the wall where the map had been posted. Subsequent investigation revealed that Victor Kraus was a false identity. The real owner of the apartment had died 2 years earlier, and someone had assumed his identity, continuing to pay taxes and bills to avoid suspicion. No neighbor questioned the change in appearance, as few had actually met the real Victor. The case of the Apartment 302 archivist, as it became known in the local press, led to a review of unsolved disappearances in Vienna over the past 3 years. 5 cases were potentially connected to the fake Victor, although without conclusive evidence. What's up, guys? The stories of sharing a house with psychopaths are chilling even now, aren't they? If you're enjoying these scary stories, take the opportunity to take a quick break, subscribe to the channel, and leave your like. This really helps the channel grow and motivates me to continue bringing you more chilling content. Now, shall we go back to the next stories? There's still a lot of fear ahead. The temporary exchange, the summer in Lyon, was particularly hot when Professor Richard Bennett, an expert in French literature at the University of Manchester, found the perfect deal on the HomeSwitch app. A month in a charming apartment in the historic Croix-Rousse district in exchange for his home in Manchester. The ideal opportunity to finish his book on French symbolist poets. The owner, Antoine Mercier, described himself as a professor of English literature at the University of Lyon. A perfect coincidence, thought Richard. The photos showed an elegant apartment in a 19th century building overlooking the Saône River. Communication was brief and practical, limited to logistical details. Antoine explained that he would be traveling for work and would only use Richard's house as a base for his research. At 45 years old, divorced and without children, Richard saw the exchange as an opportunity for cultural immersion without the prohibitive costs of hotels. The deal was closed quickly, and on July 1st, Richard arrived at the Lyon apartment. The place was exactly like the photos. Old wooden floors, shelves full of books, a small balcony overlooking the city. In the early days, Richard established a pleasant routine, writing in the morning, exploring the city in the afternoon, and dining at small local bistros. It was on the 5th day that he noticed something strange. While looking for printer paper, he found a locked drawer in the desk. The key, hidden under the lining of the top drawer, revealed disturbing contents. Blank identity documents, official stamps, and most alarmingly, a folder with detailed information about Richard. Copies of his passport, academic records, even bank statements he didn't remember sharing. Uneasy but reluctant to jump to conclusions, Richard decided to investigate further. In the bedroom, behind a painting, he discovered a built-in safe. He was unable to open it, but the discovery increased his anxiety. That night, he received a message from Antoine. "Is everything okay with the apartment? I hope you're productive. Manchester is fascinating." Attached is a selfie of Antoine at Richard's house. Something about the man's smile seemed strangely calculated. The next morning, the elderly neighbor from the next apartment, Madame Rousseau, rang the doorbell with a package. "It's arrived for Antoine," he explained in slow French. When Richard mentioned exchanging houses, her expression changed. "Antoine, but the name of the boy who lives here is Laurent Dubois. He's only been here 3 months." The package, which Richard opened after his neighbor left, contained laboratory chemicals and a manual on forensic evidence removal techniques. Alarmed, Richard searched the apartment thoroughly. At the bottom of a kitchen cupboard, he found a shoebox containing newspaper clippings about unsolved disappearances in Manchester over the past 2 years. All involved academics or university students who had disappeared without a trace. On the laptop that Antoine Laurent had left in case he needed it, Richard discovered after guessing the password, ironically symbolized a meticulous plan. The man was using his identity to lure victims in Manchester, students interested in guidance from Professor Bennett. The messages indicated meetings were arranged at Richard's house for interviews during the last 2 weeks of July. Even more disturbing, the plan included returning to Lyon exactly when Richard would still be there, with the clear intention of eliminating the only person who could unmask the false identity. Richard immediately contacted the French police, who were initially skeptical. It was only when he presented the documents found and clippings about disappearances that the investigation officially began. Meanwhile, in Manchester, Professor Bennett had begun interviewing candidates for a special study program that did not exist. 2 students had already visited the house and were not seen again. The British police, alerted by their French colleagues, set up surveillance at Richard's house. When Antoine returned after an alleged encounter, he was detained. A search revealed disturbing evidence in the basement, a space Richard himself rarely visited. The man's true identity was Laurent Mercier. He had used his real surname, a narcissistic slip common among criminals. A former assistant professor, expelled from the University of Bordeaux for inappropriate behavior with students. Over the past 3 years, he had developed a sophisticated method. He identified academics who lived alone, studied them meticulously, and then proposed temporary changes of residence through reliable applications. During the exchanges, he used the identity and reputation of his victims to attract vulnerable people who disappeared without raising immediate suspicion. When he returned to his own apartment, he eliminated the original academic, permanently assuming his identity when necessary. The investigation connected Laurent to 5 previous disappearances in 3 different countries. In each case, he had used the same method of temporarily exchanging residences. For Richard, returning to Manchester was traumatic. His home, now a crime scene, was unrecognizable. His reputation, temporarily tarnished by association with the crimes, required months to restore. The book about French symbolists remained unfinished. The case of the fatal exchange, as it was called by the press, led to significant changes in the security protocols of home exchange applications. Background checks became mandatory and monitoring systems were implemented. Laurent Mercier awaits trial in a maximum security prison. During interrogations, he remained calm and articulate, discussing French literature with researchers as if he were in a classroom. The silent subtenant widowhood had left Margaret Sinclair with a Victorian house that was too big and a boarding house that was too small. At 76 years old, the former librarian decided to rent out the back room to supplement her income. When Ian Campbell appeared responding to the ad in the local newspaper, it seemed like a blessing. A quiet 45-year-old man who worked the night shift as hospital security and promised to barely be noticed. "You won't even notice my presence," he assured with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I just need a quiet place to rest during the day." The traditionally safe and family-friendly Morningside neighborhood was perfect for Margaret, who had known most of her neighbors for decades. Her small stone cottage, inherited from her husband who had died 5 years earlier, had an extra bedroom that had remained empty since her son moved to Australia. In the first few weeks, Ian proved to be the ideal tenant. He paid punctually, always in cash, kept his room spotless, and occasionally helped with small repairs around the house. He was rarely present, He left before dark and returned after dawn when Margaret was already awake preparing tea. It was in mid-December that Mr. Wallace from the cottage next door disappeared without warning. He went to visit his sister in Glasgow, his wife explained to concerned neighbours, although she seemed confused about the details. Margaret found it strange. Wallace had never mentioned a sister in Glasgow, and Christmas was approaching, a time when the couple traditionally decorated the garden with festive lights. 2 weeks later, it was the turn of the young student, who rented the basement of the house on the corner, to disappear. Her worried parents contacted the university, only to discover that she had not attended classes for days. The police were called, but with no signs of a break-in or struggle, they treated it as another case of an adult who decided to leave voluntarily. Margaret began to notice small changes in her own home. Objects out of place. Doors, she was sure. She'd locked found open, the faint smell of chemicals, when neither she nor Ian used strong cleaning products. He attributed it to old age, to his failing memory. One night, unable to sleep due to joint pain, Margaret went down to the kitchen to make tea. He heard noises coming from the basement, a space he rarely visited since the stairs became difficult for his knees. He thought he heard muffled voices. The next morning he questioned Ian, who promptly explained, "It must be the old heating system, Mrs. Sinclair. I can check for you." Ian insisted on fixing the lock on the basement door, for security. Margaret gratefully accepted, without realizing that the new lock only had one key, which he kept. The disappearances continued. Mrs. McGregor, who lived alone at the end of the street. The postman who had served the neighborhood for years, each case treated as isolated by overwhelmed authorities. It was the disappearance of her best friend Eleanor that made Margaret connect the dots. The day before, Eleanor had commented on Margaret's strange tenant. "He watches me when he thinks I'm not looking. Yesterday I saw him coming out of the cellar carrying something heavy in the middle of the night." Determined to investigate, Margaret waited for Ian to leave for work and used the spare key she had secretly made. The basement was different. New dividing walls created small compartments. In one of them, he found carefully organized belongings: Mr. Wallace's watch, the student's laptop, the postman's badge, Eleanor's favorite brooch. On a makeshift desk, as an office, a meticulously kept notebook listed names, routines, and acquisition methods. His own name was at the bottom of the list, marked Next after transfer of ownership, alongside forged documents including a power of attorney with his forged signature, giving Ian control over his home and bank accounts after his move to the nursing home. Trembling, Margaret photographed everything with the simple cell phone that her grandson had insisted he learn to use. Hearing the front door opening unexpectedly, Ian returning out of time, he hurried upstairs, forgetting his glasses on the table in the basement. During dinner, Ian was unusually chatty, insisting that Margaret try a special tea he had brought. "It helps with joint pain," he explained, watching her closely. Margaret pretended to drink it, spilling the liquid on the plant when he became distracted. Later, she saw him checking the withered plant with an irritated expression. The next morning, Margaret visited the police station with the evidence. Detective Fraser, initially skeptical, changed his stance after seeing the photos and hearing the detailed account. The investigation revealed a horrifying truth. Ian Campbell was actually Thomas Blackwood, wanted in 3 counties for similar disappearances. His method was always the same. He rented rooms from lonely elderly people, gained their trust, forged property transfer documents, and then disposed of them, making it appear that they had voluntarily moved to nursing homes or to live with distant relatives. Margaret's basement revealed enough evidence to connect him to 9 disappearances. Authorities found an elaborate system of hidden compartments, some containing victims' belongings, others containing remains that police declined to detail to the press. The case shocked Edinburgh and led to new vetting protocols for sublets. Margaret, now living with her son's family who returned from Australia, still wakes with a start some nights, imagining silent footsteps in the hallway. The shared heritage. The Victorian home at 237 Maple Street remained boarded up for nearly a decade after Eleanor Blackwood's death. When his will was finally located and validated, the surprise: the estate would be divided equally between two cousins who barely knew each other. Thomas Blackwood, a 38-year-old university professor, and Rebecca Blackwood, a 35-year-old art restorer. You have 6 months to decide whether to sell the property or buy out the other, explained the lawyer, handing over the keys. Until then, you can use the house as you see fit. The 3-story mansion, valued at nearly $2 million, was a 19th-century relic in a historic Boston neighborhood. Thomas, recently divorced and in need of a place to stay, proposed a temporary solution. We could live together while we decide what to do. We save on rent and get to know the property better. Rebecca, who had just returned from London after years working abroad, reluctantly agreed. After all, they were civilized adults and distant cousins. They had only met twice at family funerals. The first few days were cordial, each occupying a different wing of the spacious house. Thomas settled on the second floor, turning one of the bedrooms into an office to continue his research in American criminal history, his academic specialty. Rebecca took the first floor, using the old music room as a restoration studio. It was in the 3rd week that Rebecca began to notice strange behavior. Thomas spent hours in the basement, where he had installed shelves and a work table. He often left in the early hours of the morning and returned with heavy boxes. When questioned, he vaguely explained that he was collecting materials for research. One night while Thomas was away, Rebecca found the basement door unlocked. Curiosity won over discretion. Descending the stairs, he found a meticulous reproduction of a scene that seemed strangely familiar. Antique furniture arranged exactly as in a black-and-white photograph posted on the wall. The living room of the Borden family, scene of the infamous 1892 double homicide in Fall River, Massachusetts. On a bookshelf, chronologically organized folders contained newspaper clippings about historic crimes that occurred in Massachusetts. One folder in particular caught his eye: Blackwood Cases, 1925 to 1935. Inside, articles about an almost forgotten crime: the murder of 3 sisters in a house on the same street, just 5 numbers away. "It's just academic research," Thomas explained the next morning when confronted. "I'm writing a book about historic Massachusetts crimes, with a special focus on those that occurred in this neighborhood." The explanation seemed reasonable, but something in Thomas's tone made Rebecca uneasy. Over the next few days, he noticed other disturbing details. Thomas meticulously photographed each room in the house, measured distances between furniture, and occasionally muttered calculations to himself. Investigating her cousin's past, Rebecca discovered that his doctoral thesis had been on psychological patterns in historical family crimes. More alarming, Thomas had been briefly investigated following his ex-wife's disappearance, although he was never formally charged. Tensions escalated when Rebecca found, hidden at the bottom of a drawer in Thomas's office, a detailed schedule, with specific dates marked in red. The next one just 3 days later. Next to it is a list of names, including your own, with notes about daily routines and sleep schedules. That night, Rebecca heard Thomas in the basement, hammering and sawing, until dawn. In the morning, he announced a 2-day trip for field research. As soon as she left, Rebecca searched her room and found under the mattress surgical gloves, ropes cut to specific lengths, and a book on forensic techniques for removing evidence. The basement, the recreation, had evolved. It now included stains that looked like dried blood in specific patterns on the floor. On the wall, a new photograph, the house where they lived, with red markings indicating specific points, including their bedroom. Rebecca immediately contacted her lawyer, who revealed a crucial detail that was initially omitted. Aunt Eleanor had died under suspicious circumstances, and Thomas had been the last person to visit her alive. Police, initially skeptical, changed their stance when they found evidence in the basement linking Thomas to 3 unsolved crimes in college towns, where he had previously taught. The pattern was always the same: meticulous recreations of historical crimes followed by updated versions with contemporary victims. Thomas was detained upon his return, carrying chemicals and tools that exactly matched those used in a triple homicide on the same street in 1932. On his laptop was a detailed manuscript titled Blood Heritage: Recreating the Blackwoods Criminal History, with a final chapter yet to be written. The case shocked Boston and was documented as one of the most meticulously planned in recent criminal history. Rebecca was left with the Victorian house, now entirely hers, after Thomas was deemed ineligible for inheritance due to the Slayer rule, the legal principle that prevents criminals from benefiting from inheritances related to their crimes. The mansion was sold months later, well below market value, due to its new, sinister reputation. The unknown husband. The accident happened on a curve on the Great Ocean Road when Robert and Eliza Harmon's car skidded in the rain and rolled over. 3 times before coming to a stop, Eliza suffered only minor injuries, but Robert was unconscious for 2 days. When he finally woke up in the Royal Melbourne Hospital, he looked at his wife with a blank expression. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the newly removed endotracheal tube. Doctors diagnosed dissociative amnesia with components of retrograde amnesia. Robert remembered his name and basic information, but he had lost significant autobiographical memories, especially relating to the last 5 years, including his entire relationship with Eliza. "It's common after head trauma," explained the neurologist. "Memories may return gradually, but don't force it. Let them come back naturally." For Eliza, a 34-year-old university professor, a surreal journey began, reintroducing herself to the man she had been married to for 3 years. The Robert who emerged from the accident was surprisingly different, kinder, more caring and patient than the husband she had known. "I'm sorry I don't remember you," he said often, holding her hand tenderly. "But I understand why I fell in love." In the first few weeks after returning home, Eliza felt strangely comforted by the change. The pre-accident Robert had been intense, sometimes distant, often absorbed by work as a financial consultant. This new Robert seemed genuinely interested in reconnecting her, asking questions about their relationship, listening intently to her stories. "It's like I've been given a second chance," Eliza confessed to her sister over the phone. "He's more present now than he ever was." The first clue that something was wrong came when Eliza found a passport hidden at the bottom of a toolbox in the garage. It was in Robert's name, but with a different surname. Hargrove, not Harmon. The photo was definitely of him, albeit younger, with different hair. When asked, Robert seemed genuinely confused. "Maybe it's from before the amnesia? I don't remember having another passport." Days later, Eliza received a strange call. A woman asking for Robert Hargrove, insisting that she needed to speak to him urgently. When Eliza explained about the accident and the amnesia, the woman was silent for a moment before abruptly hanging up. Curiosity turned to concern when Eliza found an unknown key in Robert's coat. On impulse, he tried it on a small safe they had found when they moved into their current house, a safe that Robert had always said didn't have a key. Inside, he found disturbing documents, a 7-year-old marriage certificate to a woman named Claire Hargrove, identity documents with different names, and newspaper clippings about a corporate fraud case in Sydney where a financial consultant had disappeared with millions of dollars from clients. The photo of the suspect, although different in appearance, was unmistakably Robert. Even more alarming, a meticulously kept notebook detailing information about Eliza before they even met, her schedules, habits, financial information. The last entry, dated a week before the accident, said, "Final transfer scheduled. Exit. A plan in progress." As Eliza tried to process these discoveries, she noticed subtle changes in Robert. Occasionally, she caught him watching her with a calculating expression that disappeared instantly when noticed. Sometimes in his sleep, he murmured names he had never mentioned. The final confirmation came when Eliza, now actively investigating, discovered storage rented in the name of Robert Hargrove. Inside, he found evidence of multiple identities. Financial documents indicating substantial transfers from their joint offshore accounts, and, most disturbingly, a detailed plan to disappear, including a one-way plane ticket to a country without an extradition treaty, scheduled for 3 days after the crash. Confronted with the evidence, Robert initially maintained a facade of amnesiac confusion. But when Eliza mentioned contacting the police, something changed in her eyes. The mask dropped momentarily, revealing a calculating coldness. "You wouldn't understand," he said, his voice suddenly different, harder. "It was never personal. You were just convenient." The subsequent police investigation revealed the full truth. Robert was actually David Hargrove, wanted in 3 states for elaborate frauds. His method was always the same: assume new identities, marry financially stable women, and systematically drain their resources before disappearing. The accident had interrupted his escape plan after completing the scheme with Eliza. More disturbingly, his first wife, Claire, had been found dead under suspicious circumstances after threatening to expose him, a case that remained technically unsolved. For Eliza, the revelation was devastating. The man with whom she had shared her life had never really existed. Every moment of intimacy, every whispered confession, every plan for the future, everything had been meticulously calculated by a patient predator who had selected, studied, and manipulated her from the beginning. The amnesia, forensic experts said, was probably genuine, a cruel fluke that had temporarily erased not only his memories, but also the carefully constructed layers of deception, briefly revealing a less calculating personality that could have been his true self before years of deception and manipulation. While Robert David awaited trial, Eliza began the painful process of rebuilding her life and identity. The case has been documented in forensic psychology publications as a rare example of how brain trauma can temporarily disrupt patterns of psychopathic behavior, offering a window into the person who might have been. And so we come to the end of our 7 horror stories involving people who shared a house with psychopaths. So which one scared you the most? Will any make you check the history of your next roommate better? Tell us in the comments which one was your favorite. If you enjoyed this dive into the scary world of living with dangerous people, don't forget to leave a like. This really helps the channel grow and encourages me to bring you more chilling stories. And if you are not yet registered, take the opportunity now to sign up and activate the bell.